It was a brisk autumn evening when I found out, the kind of night that makes you long for a warm cup of tea and the comfort of a familiar routine. I'd been feeling especially sentimental lately, what with the baby's kicks growing stronger and my best friend, Lila, visiting more often. It should have been a joyous time, a chapter in my life blooming with promise. But that night shattered everything. I was folding baby clothes in the nursery, carefully smoothing each pastel piece, when my phone buzzed on the dresser. It was an unknown number, but the message that followed wasn't unfamiliar. A simple text that read, "You deserve to know the truth. Check his messages." A pit formed in my stomach, the kind you only feel when you know, deep down, that your world is about to change. I wasn't the type to snoop. Trust had been the cornerstone of my marriage to James, or so I thought. But the text sat there, accusing me of being blind to something, daring me to take the first step down a rabbit hole I wasn't sure I could climb out of. My hands trembled as I unlocked James's laptop, where he often left his accounts logged in. He was at a late-night work meeting, and Lila had just left after helping me reorganize the closet. My pulse quickened as I opened his email, scrolling past the usual work-related correspondence until something caught my eye, a string of messages under the subject line, "Can't wait to see you again." It wasn't just the subject that made my heart stop, it was the sender. Lila. Her tone was casual, intimate, and every word cut deeper than the last. There were mentions of hotel rooms, sneaking around, and worst of all, excitement about a future. A future that didn't seem to include me. My head spun. This was the woman who had been my maid of honor, who had cried at my wedding, who held my hand through the nausea and cravings of my pregnancy. And James, my James, was complicit in all of it. I closed the laptop with a thud and sat in stunned silence. My heart begged me to believe it was a misunderstanding. But my gut? My gut knew better. I barely slept that night. My mind ran in endless circles, replaying every laugh, every shared meal, every time James's phone buzzed and he brushed it off. A million questions swirled in my head, but none louder than one: how could they? Morning came, gray and cold, as if the universe knew my heart was shattered. James returned home around 7 a.m., his tie slightly loosened and his briefcase in hand. He kissed my cheek, like always, and mumbled something about how tired he was. I couldn't hold it in. "James, can we talk?" He paused, his back to me. "Sure, babe. Just let me grab some coffee." "No," my voice was firm, surprising even me. "We need to talk now." He turned to face me, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" The air between us felt heavy as I stared at him, struggling to find the right words. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times during the sleepless hours of the night, but nothing seemed sufficient. Finally, I simply said, "I know about Lila." For a moment, his expression was unreadable, like a statue frozen in time. Then came the subtle widening of his eyes, the telltale sign of panic. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "I saw the emails." The room was so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator. He looked away, running a hand through his hair. "I can explain," he muttered. "Explain?" I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to me. "Explain what?" "How you betrayed your pregnant wife with her best friend. Or how you've been sneaking around behind my back while I've been here, folding baby clothes and planning our future." He winced at my words, but I didn't stop. "How long, James? How long has this been going on?" 6 months, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 months. Half a year. Half a year of lies, of pretending, of letting me look Lila in the eye and believe we were still the inseparable duo we'd been since college. Tears blurred my vision as I sank into the couch, my hands clutching my growing belly. Why? Why her? He hesitated, then said, "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. We started talking more, Anne." "Talking?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You think that justifies what you've done?" He knelt in front of me, reaching for my hands, but I pulled away. I made a mistake, he said, his voice breaking. A huge mistake. But it didn't mean anything. That's a lie. His head snapped up. What? You don't plan hotel getaways for someone who doesn't mean anything, I said, the words laced with venom. You don't talk about a future with someone who doesn't mean anything. So don't insult me by pretending this was just some meaningless fling. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Then, he said something that caught me completely off guard. She told me she's in love with me. My breath hitched. It felt like a final blow, one I hadn't been prepared for. And you? I asked, my voice barely audible. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. James didn't answer right away. He looked at me, his lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. The silence stretched, sharp as a knife. You don't even have the courage to tell me the truth, I said, my voice trembling. After everything you've done, you owe me that much. He exhaled heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know how I feel, he finally admitted. It's all so complicated. Complicated? I snapped, anger surging through me like a tidal wave. You don't know how you feel? You're married, James. You made a vow, to me, to this family. And now, when everything is crumbling because of your selfishness, all you can say is it's complicated? My words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. I never wanted to hurt you, he murmured. Don't, I cut in. Don't you dare try to make this about your guilt. You hurt me, James. You hurt me, and you hurt our child. And for what? For her. He tried to speak, but I raised a hand, silencing him. I trusted you. I trusted her. Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just betray me, you destroyed something sacred. You broke the family we were building. I stood, unable to sit still any longer. My legs felt unsteady, but I needed to move. I needed space. I need you to leave, I said, my voice firm despite the tears streaming down my face. What? His head shot up, panic flashing in his eyes. You heard me. Pack your things and go. I can't look at you right now. Please, can't we just? No, my voice cracked, but I didn't waver. I need time to think. And you? You need to figure out what kind of man you want to be. He stared at me, his expression a mixture of regret and desperation. Where am I supposed to go? Go to her, I said bitterly. Isn't that what you've been doing all along? The room fell into an icy silence. Finally, James nodded and rose to his feet. I'll stay at a hotel, he said quietly. But I'll be back. We'll figure this out. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I turned my back on him as he walked out of the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the hollow space where my trust used to live. When the front door closed behind him, I collapsed onto the couch, sobs racking my body. I pressed my hands to my belly, whispering, I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Hours passed like a blur. The house was eerily quiet, and the emptiness felt suffocating. By evening, I couldn't sit still any longer. My mind was spinning with questions, and there was only one person who could give me answers. Lila. I didn't warn her before I showed up at her door. I couldn't risk her preparing excuses or twisting the narrative. When she opened the door, her face paled. She knew. Can I come in? I asked, my voice cold and steady. She hesitated but stepped aside. The house smelled like lavender, her favorite candle burning on the coffee table. The same scent that used to fill my home when she'd come over for movie nights or long chats. Look, she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. I'm not here for your excuses, I said. I want the truth. All of it. Lila's eyes darted away, guilt etched into every line of her face. It just happened, she said softly. I let out a bitter laugh. You and James must love that phrase. It just happened. Like you tripped and fell into bed together. She winced. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Then why did it? I pressed. You're my best friend, Lila. Or at least, you were. How could you do this to me? She fidgeted with her hands, her shoulders slumping. I don't have an excuse, she admitted. I was lonely. And James, he listened. He made me feel seen. Her words were like shards of glass, cutting into my already broken heart. Do you love him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lila looked up, tears in her eyes. I don't know, she said. I think I might. The final blow. I stood there, staring at her, this woman I had trusted with every secret, every joy, every heartbreak, and realized she wasn't the person I thought she was. I hope it was worth it, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and anger. Because you've lost me. You've lost us. And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving her to the ruins she'd created. The days that followed were a blur of pain and numbness. James stayed away, and I busied myself with anything that kept my hands moving, folding laundry, cleaning every surface in the house, organizing the nursery again and again. But the ache inside me lingered, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. On the third day, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a fleeting moment, I thought it might be James. I braced myself, smoothing my shirt over my bump, and opened the door. It wasn't James. It was Lila's husband, Derek. His dark eyes met mine, and for a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Derek was a quiet, unassuming man, the kind who always seemed to blend into the background. But now, his face was tight with tension, his jaw clenched as if holding back a flood of emotions. Can I come in? He asked, his voice low. I hesitated but stepped aside. He walked into the living room, his gaze flicking around the space before settling on me. I know, he said bluntly. My stomach dropped. You know? About James and Lila, he clarified, his voice sharp. I've known for weeks. The words hit me like a freight train. Weeks? He nodded, running a hand through his hair. I suspected something was going on, so I hired a private investigator. I sank onto the couch, my legs too weak to hold me up any longer. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about it, he admitted, sitting down across from me. But I wasn't sure how to do it without destroying everything. I kept hoping I was wrong, that it wasn't what it looked like. And now? I asked, my voice trembling. Now I know for sure, he said grimly. The investigator gave me pictures, emails, everything. I wanted to come to you sooner, but I didn't want to hurt you more than I had to. Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced myself to hold them back. What are you going to do? I've already confronted Lila, he said. She denied it at first, but when I showed her the evidence, she couldn't lie anymore. He paused, his jaw tightening. I'm filing for divorce. The finality of his words sent a shiver down my spine. Divorce. The word felt like a sharp edge, slicing through the life I'd imagined for myself, for my child. What about you? Derek asked, his voice softer now. I don't know, I admitted. James is staying at a hotel. I told him to leave, but I haven't made any decisions yet. Derek nodded, his expression thoughtful. If you want my advice, don't rush into anything. Let the dust settle first. His calmness was surprising, almost unnerving. How are you so composed about this? I asked. He let out a bitter laugh. Trust me, I'm not. But I have to keep it together for the kids. The kids. I hadn't even thought about how this was affecting Derek's family. How are they handling it? They don't know yet, he said, his voice heavy. I'm trying to figure out how to tell them without tearing their world apart. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared pain hanging between us. Thank you, I said finally. For telling me. He nodded, standing. If you ever need anything, call me. We're in this mess together, whether we like it or not. As he left, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, and something else, something that felt a lot like strength. Derek's visit had reminded me that I wasn't alone in this, that there were people who understood my pain. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The weekend passed slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. James called once, asking if he could stop by to talk things through. I told him no. There wasn't anything he could say right now that would fix what he'd done. On Monday morning, I was back at the doctor's office for a routine prenatal appointment. Sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by expectant mothers with glowing faces, felt like torture. They all looked so happy, their partners at their sides, sharing in their joy. I clenched my hands over my bump, willing myself not to cry. When the nurse called my name, I followed her to the exam room, trying to focus on the rhythmic clicking of her shoes on the tile floor. My obstetrician, Dr. Patel, entered shortly after, her warm smile a small comfort. How are we feeling today? She asked, her tone as soothing as always. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Physically, fine, I said. Emotionally, not so much. Dr. Patel paused, setting down her clipboard. Do you want to talk about it? I shook my head, fighting back tears. It's just, life stuff. She nodded, her expression gentle but understanding. Well, let's focus on the baby today, okay? We'll do the usual checks and make sure everything's on track. The ultrasound was quick, and as always, seeing my baby's tiny form on the screen brought a flicker of hope to my otherwise heavy heart. Dr. Patel assured me everything looked perfect, and for a moment, I clung to that word, perfect, as if it could anchor me in the storm. But as I left the office, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that nothing in my life felt perfect anymore. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with messages. Most were from friends and family checking in, their concern thinly veiled as curiosity. I ignored them all, except one. It was from Derek. Can we talk? I hesitated before typing back. Sure. 10 minutes later, he was at my door, his face drawn with an intensity one hadn't seen before. What's wrong? I asked as he stepped inside. I think you need to see this, he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. I took it hesitantly, unfolding it to reveal a printed email chain. My heart sank as I skimmed the words. It was a conversation between James and Lila. They weren't just discussing their affair, they were planning. Planning for a future together. Planning for a time when they wouldn't have to hide. And planning, it seemed, to take my child. The blood drained from my face as I read the lines. We'll figure it out. Once the baby's here, it'll all be easier. She won't be able to stop me from being involved. I know, Lila had written back. We'll make it work. I'll help you. My hands shook as I shoved the paper back at Derek. How did you get this? I told you I hired a private investigator, he said. These were in the emails he intercepted. I could barely process the words. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my chest felt like it was caving in. They're planning to take my baby? I don't know if they mean legally or otherwise, Derek said carefully. But either way, you need to be prepared. Prepared. How could I possibly prepare for something like this? Derek must have seen the panic in my eyes because he placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Listen to me, he said firmly. You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, I'll help you fight it. His words were a lifeline in the chaos swirling around me. For the first time, I realized that my battle wasn't just about betrayal, it was about protecting my child, my future. Thank you, I whispered, my voice barely audible. We're going to get through this, Derek said, his expression resolute. Both of us. As he left, I sat down at the kitchen table, clutching my belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing my turmoil, and I whispered, "I won't let them take you. I promise." But even as I spoke the words, fear crept in. Because promises felt fragile now, like everything else in my world. The next morning, I woke to a flurry of emotions, fear, anger, and determination swirling in equal measure. I couldn't let James and Lila's plans go unanswered. If they thought I would roll over and let them take my child, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I called a lawyer. Her name was Evelyn Pierce, and she came highly recommended by a friend who had been through a nasty divorce. When Evelyn answered the phone, her voice was calm but commanding, the kind of tone that inspired confidence. "I need to protect my child," I told her, my words spilling out in a rush. "Start from the beginning," she said, her voice steady. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about the affair, about Derek's discovery, about the emails detailing their plans. Evelyn listened without interruption, taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, she said, "First, let me assure you, we'll do everything in our power to protect your parental rights. You're the primary caregiver, and with your husband's affair on record, the courts won't look kindly on his behavior." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves, but I still couldn't shake the dread curling in my stomach. "What if they try to take my baby?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We'll make sure they don't," Evelyn said firmly. "But I'll need everything you have, emails, texts, anything that proves their intentions. The more evidence we can present, the stronger your case will be." I promised to gather everything and thanked her before hanging up. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. That evening, James showed up at the house unannounced. I heard his car pull into the driveway and braced myself, my heart pounding as he knocked on the door. When I opened it, his face was tense, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I don't have anything to say to you," I replied, crossing my arms. "Well, I do," he shot back, his tone sharper than I expected. "You're freezing me out, and I can't be a father to our baby if you won't even talk to me." I laughed bitterly. "You want to be a father now? You mean after you betrayed me and plotted with Lila to take my child?" His eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked genuinely shocked. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, James. I've seen the emails. Derek showed me everything." His jaw clenched, and he looked away, guilt flashing across his face. "I wasn't trying to take the baby from you," he said finally. I was trying to figure out how I'd fit into their life after everything that's happened." "That's not what it sounded like," I countered. "It sounded like you and Lila were making plans to cut me out entirely." "That's not true," he insisted. "I know I've screwed up, more than I can ever make up for, but I would never do that to you." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I wanted to believe him. But then I remembered how easily he'd lied before, how he'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. "I don't trust you," I said, my voice cold. "Not anymore." He looked at me, his expression a mix of frustration and desperation. "I want to fix this," he said. "I know it's a long shot, but I want to try. For the baby, if nothing else." "You should have thought about that before you started an affair with my best friend," I shot back. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked defeated. "I'll stay out of your way," he said quietly. "But I'm not giving up on being a father." "You'd better not," I replied. "Because if you think for 1 second I'll let you or Lila take what's mine, you're in for a fight." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I'll leave," he said, turning toward the door. "But we'll talk again soon." I didn't respond as he walked out. When the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of triumph and exhaustion. I had drawn my line in the sand, and now it was up to James to decide which side he wanted to be on. As I stood there, the baby kicked again, a tiny reminder of the life growing inside me. I placed my hands on my belly and whispered, We'll be okay. No matter what happens, we'll be okay. But deep down, I knew the hardest battles were yet to come. The days turned into a week, and James stayed away. True to his word, he didn't push his way back into the house, but he called every few days, leaving voicemail after voicemail. His tone shifted with each message, pleading, remorseful, angry, desperate. I ignored them all. My focus was on building my case and protecting my baby. Evelyn was thorough, combing through every piece of evidence I gave her. The emails Derek had shared were the centerpiece, but I also found old texts, hotel receipts, and even a shared photo album Lila had accidentally left public. Each piece felt like a nail in the coffin of the life I once had. Derek had become my unexpected ally in all of this. We spoke often, sharing updates and strategies. There was an odd sense of camaraderie between us, a bond forged in betrayal. He'd decided to move out of the house he and Lila had shared, saying it felt too toxic to stay. I found a place close to the kids' school, he said one day over the phone. It's small, but it'll do for now. That's good, I replied, though the thought of uprooting my life still felt overwhelming. What about you? He asked. Any plans to leave? I shook my head, though he couldn't see me. No. This house is ours, or was ours. I'm not giving it up just because James couldn't keep his promises. Good, Derek said, his voice firm. Don't let them take anything more from you. A few days later, Lila tried to reach out. She sent a text that was so audacious it left me speechless. Can we talk? I think it's time we clear the air. Clear the air? The sheer nerve of her left me reeling. As if her betrayal was some minor misunderstanding we could sweep under the rug with a little heart-to-heart. I didn't reply. But later that evening, as I was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she was. Lila stood on the porch, her face pale and drawn. She looked smaller somehow, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. Can I come in? She asked hesitantly. I folded my arms, blocking the doorway. What do you want, Lila? She faltered, looking down at her hands. I need to explain. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Explain what? That you slept with my husband? That you plotted to take my child? Or that you destroyed the only friendship I thought I could count on? She winced, tears welling in her eyes. I made a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but You're right, I interrupted. You don't. Her tears spilled over, but I felt no sympathy. Do you even realize what you've done? I continued, my voice rising. You didn't just betray me, you've made it impossible for me to trust anyone ever again. You took everything good and pure about our friendship and turned it into a lie. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. Then why did you? I demanded. Why, Lila? Was I not good enough to you? Was James worth all this destruction? She didn't answer, and her silence was all the confirmation I needed. Go home, I said, my voice cold. And don't come back. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but then she nodded, turning and walking away. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. A part of me had hoped she would offer some explanation, something that would make sense of the chaos. But there was nothing. Some wounds didn't come with answers. Later that night, as I sat in the nursery, folding tiny clothes and arranging toys, my phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn. Call me tomorrow. There's been a development. The words sent a chill down my spine. I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities. What kind of development? Was it about James? About Lila? I placed a hand on my belly, the baby's gentle movements grounding me. Whatever it was, I would face it. For me. For my child. Because no matter what came next, I was ready. The next morning, I called Evelyn as soon as her office opened. My stomach churned as I waited for her to pick up, the weight of her cryptic message pressing heavily on me. "Good morning, Evelyn," I said when she answered. "You mentioned a development?" "Yes," she replied, her voice measured but serious. "I've come across something unexpected." My grip on the phone tightened. "What is it?" "I've been reviewing the evidence Derek provided and doing some digging of my own," she began. "There's something in the financial records that doesn't add up. It appears James has been funneling money into a separate account, an account under Lila's name." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? Why?" "It's hard to say without more information," Evelyn admitted. "But the amount is significant, and it's been happening for months. This could be a critical factor if we need to prove misconduct in court." "Months," I echoed, my voice hollow. "He's been planning this for months." "I'm afraid so," she said gently. "I'm sending you a copy of the records. I want you to look them over and let me know if anything stands out, any unusual expenses or transfers you weren't aware of." I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling as I placed the phone on the counter. Months. While I was blissfully planning for our baby, James had been plotting an escape plan, siphoning money to Lila in secret. When Evelyn's email arrived, I opened it immediately. The spreadsheet of transactions was meticulous, each entry a glaring reminder of James's betrayal. I scrolled through the list, noting the steady withdrawals from our joint account and the payments made to Lila. There were other charges too, hotel stays, expensive dinners, even a jewelry store purchase. My heart sank as I pieced it all together. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated effort to build a life with Lila, financed by the money we'd saved for our family's future. By evening, my anger had reached a boiling point. I couldn't sit with this information any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I called James. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. "Hello? Where are you?" I demanded. "At the hotel," he replied. "Why?" "I'm coming over," I said, not giving him a chance to object before hanging up. I arrived at the hotel 20 minutes later, barely aware of the drive. When James opened the door to his room, his expression was a mix of confusion and apprehension. "What's going on?" he asked. I stepped inside, holding up the printed financial records. "Care to explain this?" His face paled as he scanned the papers. "Where did you get this?" "That doesn't matter," I snapped. "What matters is that you've been funneling our money into Lila's account for months. Were you planning to drain us completely before I found out?" "It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice defensive. "Then what is it, James?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been using our savings to fund your affair." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was helping her," he said finally. "Helping her?" I repeated, incredulous. "She was struggling," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Derek cut her off financially, and she didn't know how to make ends meet. I didn't want her to lose her house or her car." I laughed bitterly. "So you decided to play the hero with our money? The money we saved for our family?" "I didn't think it would hurt us," he said, his voice barely audible. "Didn't think it would hurt us?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "You betrayed me, James. You betrayed our child. And now you're telling me that none of it mattered to you because it didn't hurt you?" He looked at me, his expression pleading. "I made a mistake, okay? I'm trying to make things right." "It's too late for that," I said, my voice shaking. "You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, over and over again. And now, you're going to live with the consequences." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "I want to be part of the baby's life," he said, his tone desperate. "No matter what happens between us, I need to be there for them." I turned back, meeting his gaze. "Then you'd better start acting like a father," I said coldly. "Because so far, all you've done is prove how little you care about this family." And with that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The drive home was a blur, my mind spinning with everything James had said, or failed to say. His excuses, his deflection, his cowardice. It all boiled down to one truth: he wasn't the man I thought he was. When I arrived home, Derek was waiting in his car outside my house. His unexpected presence startled me, but I waved him in. "What's going on?" I asked as he stepped inside, his face grim. "I found something," he said, pulling out a flash drive. "What is it?" "It's a recording," he said, hesitating for a moment before adding, "from one of Lila's meetings with her lawyer. My investigator managed to get a copy." "A recording?" My stomach tightened with unease. "What's on it?" He handed me the drive, his expression unreadable. "You need to hear it for yourself." I plugged the drive into my laptop, my hands trembling as I pressed play. Lila's voice filled the room, clear and confident. "He won't fight me on custody," she was saying. "James is too focused on looking like a good guy to push back. Once the baby's here, he'll convince her to agree to joint custody, and from there, it'll be easy to transition to full custody later." My blood ran cold as I listened. "And if she doesn't agree?" her lawyer asked. "She will," Lila replied. "She's too prideful to fight him in court. She doesn't want the drama. Besides, I'll make sure James plays his part perfectly. He's already talking about how the baby deserves a stable two-parent household, even if it's with us." I slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. Derek watched me, his jaw tight. "She's planning to take my baby," I whispered, the words feeling surreal. "They both are," he said. "Lila's pulling the strings, but James is letting her." The weight of the betrayal settled heavily on my chest. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was war. The next day, I met with Evelyn in her office. I played her the recording, watched her sharp eyes narrow as she absorbed every word. "This is gold," she said when it ended. "It proves intent, manipulation, and bad faith on both their parts." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaky. "We file for full custody," Evelyn said firmly. "We'll present this as evidence to show they're unfit to co-parent. And we'll move quickly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to solidify their plans." Her determination gave me a flicker of hope. "Do you think we'll win? With this recording?" "Absolutely," she said. "But you need to be prepared. This won't be easy. They'll fight back, and it could get ugly." "I don't care how ugly it gets," I said, my voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my child." That evening, I called James. "We need to meet," I said. "What for?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "You'll find out when you get here," I replied before hanging up. He arrived an hour later, looking wary. I didn't waste any time. I played the recording for him, watching as the color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "That doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that I know exactly what you and Lila are planning. And I'm telling you right now, it's not going to happen." "It's not what it sounds like," he began, but I cut him off. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't insult me with more lies. I have a lawyer. I have evidence. And if you think for 1 second that I'm going to let you take my baby, you're dead wrong." His expression shifted from shock to anger. "You don't get to make all the decisions," he said. "I'm their father." "Then act like one," I shot back. "Because right now, all you've done is prove how selfish and irresponsible you are." We stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Finally, he spoke. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone resigned. "I want you to stop this madness," I said. "Drop whatever plans you've made with Lila. Stop trying to manipulate the situation to suit yourselves. And if you don't, I'll take you to court, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." He didn't respond, his jaw clenching as he looked away. "Your move, James," I said quietly. But make no mistake, I'm ready for whatever you throw at me." As he left, I felt a new strength building within me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Whatever came next, I would be ready. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparations, emotional upheaval, and moments of clarity that reminded me of the life I was fighting for. Evelyn worked tirelessly, drafting motions and gathering evidence. Derek continued to offer support, sharing his insights into Lila's manipulative tendencies and standing firm in his own custody battle. James kept his distance, but I knew better than to believe he was backing down. He and Lila were likely plotting their next move, but this time, I wasn't the naive woman they'd blindsided. I was ready for them. 2 weeks later, Evelyn and I arrived at the courthouse for the emergency custody hearing. My heart pounded as I stepped into the sterile room, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Across the aisle, James and Lila sat side by side, their lawyer whispering to them. Lila avoided my gaze, but James looked at me, his expression unreadable. The hearing began, and Evelyn didn't hold back. She presented the financial records, the damning emails, and finally, the recording. The judge's face hardened as he listened to Lila's voice, dripping with calculated intent. When it was James's turn to speak, he faltered. I made mistakes," he stammered. "But I never meant to take the baby from her. I wanted to be involved." Evelyn pounced. "And you thought the best way to be involved was to funnel money into your mistress's account and plot to manipulate the mother of your child? Is that correct?" James shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her gaze. Lila's lawyer tried to argue that the recording was taken out of context, but the judge wasn't buying it. "The intent here is clear," she said, her voice stern. "This behavior is not only inappropriate but also deeply concerning." By the time the hearing ended, the judge had ruled in my favor, granting me full custody and placing restrictions on James's visitation rights. Lila was barred from any contact with my child. As we left the courtroom, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it brought me to tears. I had won. That evening, Derek came by to check on me. He brought dinner, homemade lasagna, and a bottle of sparkling water. "You did it," he said, smiling as he set the food on the table. "We did it," I corrected, offering him a small smile. We sat together, eating in comfortable silence. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. "You're stronger than you think," Derek said after a while, his voice soft. I looked at him, seeing the quiet strength he carried despite his own pain. "So are you." He chuckled. "Maybe we'll survive this mess after all." "We will," I said firmly. "For our kids." The next few months were a period of rebuilding. I focused on preparing for the baby's arrival, surrounding myself with supportive friends and family. Derek and I stayed in touch, our bond deepening as we navigated the aftermath of our shared betrayal. James made a few half-hearted attempts to reach out, but I kept my boundaries firm. He didn't deserve a place in my life, and I wasn't about to let him undermine the progress I'd made. When the baby finally arrived, a beautiful, healthy boy, I held him close, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. In that moment, I realized that everything I had endured had led me to this, a chance to start anew, to build a life filled with love and strength. As I looked into my son's eyes, I whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.